Search sees its role as being a really great body to facilitate discussion between all of these groups and give us an opportunity to discuss these issues and work out, what we can do as progressive activists to tackle a lot of the issues that we're facing today, such as attacks on penalty rates. So many of you will be aware the Fair Work Commission recently ruled many changes to penalty rates, of which are going to be particularly impactful on young workers working shift work, part-time work on the weekends. Obviously, these penalty rates aren't just an additional bonus for those workers. Many workers, both young and older workers, rely on penalty rates just to get by, to pay their bills, and this is going to be such a huge blow to them if the Liberal government succeeds in and the Fair Work Commission succeeds in abolishing those penalty rates.
I want to acknowledge we meet on Aboriginal land and pay my respects to Elders past and present. We've got 4 speakers today, and maybe we'll let each one speak and then have some questions of the speakers afterwards, but if there's a burning question for one of the speakers, just stick your hand up, but I'm sure I can facilitate that.
One of the things that we have to think about, I think it becomes dangerous if we just think about penalty rates in isolation to what else is going on in the economy at this point. I think there's 3 frames that we have to think about where penalty rates fit and what it actually means. The first one is in relation to there is a growing inequality in Australia. And I've said this a few times, but there are 6 people in this country who have the same combined wealth as the bottom 20% of Australians. So that's 6 people have the same combined wealth as 4.2 million Australians, and that's getting worse. So we're seeing a very massive shift of wealth from the middle class, which is now shrinking, to a concentration at the top of the economic platform. The second thing that we need to think about is the changing nature of work. So work, and I know Scott Morrison was talking about how we're going to get growth in jobs over the coming years, but predominantly the growth we've seen in jobs, and they continue to see, is that it is in part-time and casualised work. There is not a growth in full-time permanent employment in this country. And I know John Buchanan always says it, but very clearly, harvester man is dead, and has been dead for a long time. The growing casualisation and part-time works are predominantly filled by women, and they are in administrative and caring professions. That's where we're seeing the growth of jobs there. The third thing that we need to see this through is in relation to technology. Artificial intelligence, one thing, so jobs becoming done by automation and robots. But secondly, the use now of platforms, electronic platforms such as Airtasker, Deliveroo, Uber, that allows us now to segment jobs into tasks. Back to Fordism if you want. The old is the new. But these platforms are now allowed to be done on a major scale and a very large scale. So I think they're the 3 frames that predominantly shape our system. The penalty rates decision is an absolute disgrace. There's no other way of saying it. It is the first time I think we've seen a very significant removal of rights and conditions from working people in this country by an institution set up to enhance people's rights and conditions. So there's a fundamental change in the way in which the Fair Work Commission is now interpreting legislation. A couple of years ago there was a decision called the Horizon decision. This is where the Commission used a section of the Act, Section 226, which enables them and employers to actually apply to have enterprise agreements terminated. Now, in the Termination Act, the Commission is supposed to take into account the effects on the employer, employees and the unions covering it, and there should be no disadvantage for those people when it's terminated. What the Horizon decision said, or interpreted basically was, and this was a decision based on, there were a number of provisions when Horizon and those workers moved from public sector to the private sector. There were a number of provisions, predominantly no forced redundancies, and what the decision actually said is the employer can now apply to have an enterprise agreement terminated because it no longer makes the business productive. That was the foundation of that decision, because the business is no longer productive. Well, exactly. One of the things about that, the irony of it, is that the employers then got up and gave a number of undertakings around how people would not be worse off, they would protect wages and conditions. Never have I seen a union be able to get up and give undertakings and the Commission accept them. The other part of that is, of course, once the decision was made, 150 workers then lost their jobs. So what we're seeing now is an environment in which not only have we got the penalty rates decision, we now have a decision where bosses come to the negotiation table and their starting point is, we need to get some reform in the company. If you can't find a way to negotiate that reform with us, we will apply to terminate your agreement and you will go on to the modern award, which is a much lower condition. So this is undermining the enterprise bargaining system, and it's undermining the rights of workers at a starting point to know that their enterprise agreement will continue to operate until a new one is actually brought in and is successfully brought in. So we actually now have a system that is A, taking conditions of employment off us, and B, sets up a system where we are negotiating for workers with basically a gun against our heads. That's the environment in which we're operating in. The third part of it is we now have a system in this country where wage theft is actually a business model. We have seen, 7-Eleven, Domino's, all these places, they have an institutional business model that says we will actually screw down the workers beyond their award weights and conditions. In the case of Domino's, the pressure on the franchises was that they had to have a certain amount of labour cost, 27%. And they had to operate within that labour cost. So that just drives them to work out ways in which to remove conditions of employment, but also to systematically underpay people. And we know that there is a failure of regulation by the Fair Work Ombudsman because they have caught out a number of these organisations. But what they do is they do a deal and they get some money back and people give them money back, and in some cases workers got the money back, and then the employer then took the money back off them again once the money was got back. But the institutions set up to regulate in this country are failing. And one of the significant things I think that has occurred at the same time we've had a rise in this wage theft is that unions have been shut out of the workplace, particularly around the ability to go in and inspect wages books of employers. We have to have an employee in that business now, and we can only inspect their wages. Previously, the unions could go in, look at the books, inspect the books, and check them. So not only were there a set of rules, there was a regulatory framework that the government operated, but also that unions provided within the workplace. That's actually been removed, and that's a significant removal of a power that workers had to ensure their conditions were correct, and there was an external body to actually then prosecute and get that money back. The Fair Work Ombudsman in the current system is just not able to do that. One of the things that we're going to be releasing in a couple of weeks, and I think this ties into another part, where the Immigration Act is actually being used as a smokescreen to also undercut conditions of employment on two levels. One, it brings in foreign workers. And we know in this country at this point in time, 1 in 10 workers in our economy are on some form of visa. So businesses have set up a business model to bring people in from overseas and to exploit them. That is the business model. They have no rights, they can't participate in democracy, they can't vote, and more often than not, their passports are removed and they're told, if you say anything, we will take your passports, give your passports back to you and send you back to the country you came from. So there's a massive systematic exploitation of people from overseas. And that goes along with the second part, that then is being used to undermine the conditions of work in this country. Because those businesses use a model of, well, we're paying these people this rate, you can't be paid at a decent minimum rate, we have to lower our labour costs, and the only way to do that is to pay less. And what we know in this country is that people will work for less. They know they are being ripped off. They know that they're not stupid, they know they're being ripped off, but in many cases, what other job have they got? Particularly young people, particularly young people in high unemployment areas, if that's the only income you've got, if that's the only choice you've got, what are you going to do? So that's the other problem, I think, very much around the structure of the economy, the business model that businesses are now using. It's been endorsed tacitly, I'd say, and I know the government will say we haven't endorsed it, but they have stripped regulation away to allow these systems to flourish, and they have ensured that if employers are caught, it's a shame. There's no actual penalty against those employers that have seen some fines, minor, but no systematic employing penalties. Now, if I went into a cafe and I picked up the register and walked out the front door, that's theft. And I'm criminally prosecuted. Why isn't that the same for bosses who are systematically ripping off young workers and people brought in from overseas on visas? And I think this poses the challenge for the union movement very significantly. How do we actually organise these platforms? How do we actually challenge the way in which this system is structured? I think there's a couple of ways. Firstly, we need to actually organise and not mobilise. What does that mean? We do a lot of stuff where we march around, we go around the street with our flags, and we do laps of the block, and we chant and that. Now, I love a good march. I'm happy to go to any march. The May Day march was a great day and it was symbolic. But what we need to get back to is a process of deep organising with people. That means talking to people one-on-one. That means politicising people. I know not many people use that word anymore, but we have to politicise people. We have to do that not just in the workplace, but outside the workplace. And the message that unions have is a powerful message. It is a right message. It is a correct message. But we don't talk that message enough, and we aren't systematically politicising our people in the workplaces. The union movement is getting back to that. I know Sally's been talking about that at the ACTU, but that is fundamental to understanding where we are. And I think the penalty rights decision has been a bit of a wake-up call for a lot of people. People are talking about it. I know we had an action a couple of weeks ago at the Chemist Warehouse. I know Linda was involved in that. Those chemists who do 4 years of university get paid $26 an hour. $26 an hour for someone who's gone and done 4 years of uni and educated. But when those people were spoken to in the workplace, they knew exactly what was going on in regards to penalty rates. They knew exactly what was happening. What we have to start saying is, how do we build a structure that educates people, harnesses what people know, and then move them to action? And that has to be done through organising, which is one-on-one conversations, systematic conversations to get people active. Then provide a collective structure in which we operate as a group. Because one of the fears at the moment, if people feel like if they stick their head up, their head's going to be chopped off. We have to move to a situation where we move as a group. Now that takes time and energy, but we need to be doing that. And I think the third thing is we need to actually start regulating these new economies. Now Airtasker, Unions New South Wales has got an agreement with them. It was an industrial Wild West. Now our agreement, for all purposes, is not an enforceable agreement. But what it is what unions do. We set a standard, then we move on from that standard and we try and enforce it through the legal system, the industrial system, or whatever other powers we can get. But at the end of the day, it is about people demanding that there is a level of decency in our workplaces, in our systems, and standing up and saying we're not going to cop it anymore. Airtasker have agreed to have the minimum rates of pay advertised, plus the 25% loading that is in the award, plus the additional 15% that they take off as an administration fee. That's not enforceable, but there is a recommendation there now. We are going to move to try and make sure we enforce those things. But as you know, we can get the best laws in the world, but the bosses will always try and find a way to get around it, and we have to get back to growing union power so the unions are actually enforcing those sorts of things. It can be done. It will be done. We just have to be a bit more adventurous in what we're doing. As a union movement, particularly, you have to ask for more. We can't keep asking for the status quo. We actually have to demand for more and fight for more. But that has to be done on the basis of strength and having people who are skilled, understand politics, are prepared to get active, know they will be supported, and most importantly, know they can win. And we have to breed a winning culture in our movement. And I think that's happening in New South Wales. Between the last ABS, I'll finish on this point, between the last ABS and this ABS, on union membership across this country, most of the states decreased significantly. The only two states that grew were New South Wales and South Australia. And New South Wales grew by 27,000 new union members. We have to, A, address the decline and stop it, B, start growing, but C, having to learn to win again. Because if you're winning, it's like the old football adage, if you're winning, you keep winning. If you're losing and you're not going anywhere, you keep losing. But in this state, I know that the unions in this state are working very hard. There's a significant change going on. Sally's now at the ACTU. She's driving an even bigger change nationally. And I think that looking forward, I think we'll be able to win. We'll be able to tackle these things, and we will be able to expand unions, improve pay and condition, and make it better for Australian workers in this country.